Get started in about 2 minutes. All right, thanks so much. Oh man, there's some feedback. We're gonna work on that. Well, it's definitely Friday. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are, I'll just do a quick introduction of our office and kind of who we have in the room and who will be presenting today. So we are within the Department of Workforce Services, Office of Homeless Services. My name is Lily Ward. I am a program specialist here, and I've been helping Russell Goodman kind of getting these funds up and running. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, Russell Goodman, work here at the Office of Homeless Services, and I'll be overseeing this HOME-ARP funding. So if you are awarded, you'll be talking with me quite a bit while we get contracts set up.
My name is Amy Lowe, and I'm a contract analyst with the Department of Workforce Services, obviously. And I will be helping kind of facilitate your grant application, make sure they get where they need to go, and then at the end, putting your grant agreement paperwork together and making sure it gets over to you. And I'll be going over the actual application process today. So happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday, over and over and over and over again. All right. So today we are going to be talking about HOME-ARP funds and specifically supportive services. Russell will talk a little bit about how this is, this pot of money is different than the traditional home funds, but I just wanted to reiterate that here. There are 3 different funnels of money here with the HOME-ARP funds. And the first one is affordable housing, which we talked about earlier this week, as well as the non-congregate shelter, which we talked about on Wednesday. You can find the recordings on the RFGA website if you'd like to look at those. But today we are talking about supportive services, obviously. So we'll get more into that. A quick kind of few minutes of housekeeping. If you are attending, I'd like you to please name your profile with your first and last name, as well as your organization, as we are keeping attendance of this meeting. To do that, you just click on the top right hand corner and the 3 little dots of your profile. And then as far as questions go, all of our attendees are attending virtually. So if you could please make use of the Q&A function, that would be awesome. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation, but we have reserved a chunk of time at the end to cover any questions that haven't been discussed thus far. And then lastly, this presentation will be recorded and uploaded via the RFGA website shortly after today's presentation. Okay, perfect. So this is our agenda. So as you can see, we have a lot to cover. Feel free to take a quick screen capture of this if you'd like to kind of keep progress of where we're at. This is about a two-hour presentation. So it might be helpful to be like, oh, we're on the budget, we're almost done. Because we recognize that it is a lot of information to cover, but attending this presentation will help you oh so much in the application itself. And then Russell will talk about the introduction and background.
Absolutely. All right, so this is specialized funding that HUD introduced last year, and it is very different from traditional home. So if you are familiar with home, you do a lot with it. Awesome, put that aside, learn this new program that just has a similar name. And this is dedicated federal funding, and it has been given to the state of Utah to help fund a group of folks that Lily will be talking about. If you'd like to read the entire notice, if you Google HUD Notice CPD 2110, you'll be able to pull that up, see exactly what we're talking about. It is quite long. So we're hoping to give some broad strokes, cover the generals, and then give you some tools if you want to jump into the specifics and get a good feel for what exactly this funding can do. All right, so the amount of money we're talking about today is $973,000. You can see the full breakdown of where each pot of money is falling for the full 12.9 million that we received. This is our first best guess allocation. At the end of the RFGA period, if applications come in, if we want to change things, these numbers aren't set in stone. So we can go about a process to change them, move them around. But this is our initial guess based on conversations we've had with a lot of different providers and research we've done on the needs in the communities. And then you can see at the bottom, there's two pots of money for nonprofit operating and capacity building. It's another portion of this grant outside of the supportive services that we'll talk about. It's all part of the same application. So if you're interested and qualify for that funding, stick around to the end. We'll talk about how you can apply for it. A note on the left there is we are prioritizing areas of the state that did not receive traditional home or did not receive HOME-ARP funds in this allocation. That does not mean that if you're in one of these counties or cities that you cannot receive the funding. It just means we're going to take an extra look at those who aren't because they don't have access to this funding otherwise. And nice thing about HOME-ARP is you can combine it with other agencies or participating jurisdictions is what they call us, HOME-ARP. So if you get some from Ogden and you need some from us, you can combine those into the same projects. There's no issues there. Any questions on that before Lily gets into the application?
Perfect, thanks, Russell. So I want to make sure I cover everything. I got my little note handy. So I just want to kind of quickly cover kind of the description and the population served as Russell talked about. So as for the description of the grant, the HOME-ARP funds really may be used to provide an array of different services, supportive services specifically to individuals and families that meet one of the definitions for the qualifying populations, which I'll talk about on the next slide here. And supportive services are defined as services provided to help participants obtain and maintain permanent housing. We've listed a couple services that are supportive down below. So this could be annual assessment of services, case management, life skills training, mental health services, things like that. And then I just want to put a plug in for the HOME-ARP supportive services fact sheet for additional guidance on qualifying services, and then just additional things as well. I'll talk more about this fact sheet in a minute, but it is a really, really helpful resource that I suggest that you utilize. So there are 5 overarching qualifying populations that can be served with HOME-ARP supportive services funding. You can see that there's the associated policy with each line of the qualifying population, but generally put, individuals or families, that are homeless as defined in that section or at risk of homelessness, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. Part of other populations where providing supportive services or assistance would prevent a family's homelessness. And then veterans and families that include a veteran family member that meet one of the 4 criteria above. And then as for a timeline, I think this is just kind of a helpful tool to refer to as you're preparing for your RFGA. So the first deadline here is December 2nd at 5 p.m. And that's the letter of intent deadline, which Amy will talk about in a minute. The second one is December 19th at 11:59. And this is where all of your application and supporting documents are due to us. And then January 2023 is the anticipated grant award date. And then lastly, we're anticipating grant funds to be effective by February 2023. So as for programs, oh, what? I may have hit the wrong button. I did, super hit the wrong button. Okay, so for additional requirements, I wanted to just kind of put them here, not to scare you, but just to highlight that we're here to support you. So generally, awarded grantees must participate in the UHC strategic plan, the COC and LHC, so that's the Continuum of Care and Local Homeless Council, the annual point in time homeless count, the housing inventory count, data initiatives as requested by us, and then other expected measurements and outcomes outlined in the RFGA packet and in the contract that you signed with us. And then in order to be eligible, the project or the agency is applying for the project must be within the state of Utah. And then you have to serve qualifying populations. You must comply with the Home Investment Partnerships Program as outlined in 24 CFR Part 92 and HUD Notice CPD 2110. And then you must comply with attachment B scope of work, as Amy will talk a little bit about later. All right, perfect. For reporting requirements, Russell will kind of take this over.
All right. So just like any other grant that you receive from our office or from most agencies, you do have some reporting that we expect you to do. So in this case, we'll have a set of measures quarterly that you report on, and then a set of measures that we'll do every year. So examples of those are going to be how many folks you assisted, how many case managers that you funded with this project, how long folks are staying in your project, and then we're going to decide as time goes on some other measures that are going to be specific to your program. Because this can fund such a wide group of activities, we don't really know exactly what every single person will report on, but if you are awarded, we'll discuss that during the award process. And then there at the bottom, we do expect folks to be entering into the Homeless Management Information System. If you're unfamiliar with that, it's a statewide data system that our office maintains that you put individuals' information into, and we aggregate it, do some great stuff with it. If you're not familiar with that, we are happy to help you get up to speed. It's not the most complicated thing. And then if you're a domestic violence partner, we will allow you to put into your comparable database to keep that information safe. And then for the nonprofit capacity funding that I mentioned at the beginning, it'll have a different set of measures, and we'll talk about that in a little while. So it is, like I said, it's going to be going into that system, and then we will be going over this in depth as you get awarded. If you have ideas for what your project should be measuring or how you're going to show the effectiveness of your project, be thinking about that as you're writing your application, and then it'll be good to have on hand after award. So once again, this is HOME-ARP. This is federal funding. It is not home funding. It is not really anything else we've ever seen before. This is a one-time award that HUD put out last year. So make sure you're learning the rules of this and not really expecting it to be similar to some other things. Grants will start February 1st, 2023 and go until June 30th, 24. We will do this in a competitive evaluation to make sure that we're funding the best possible projects in each community. All the evaluation criteria in the RFGA packet. At the end of your grant, we will ask for any unspent money back. And if you're familiar with this term, it's supplant existing funds. Basically, this means if you already have a program that's up and running, if you're already using funds for that program, we do not allow you to just replace those funds and continue the same thing. This should be building capacity. This should be new and improved funding. It shouldn't just be continuing something that you were going to run anyways. So keep that in mind. If you have some specific thoughts on it or questions, let us know. It's pretty standard for any federal funding. So like I said, this will be a competitive grant. We do not limit the number of applications that you can submit, but you will need to do a different application for each project that you're hoping to get funded. You must be available for questions post-application. So if we need to clarify anything, if we need to fix anything, we'll give you a call. And then we will ask that you're available if we need you to present to any of our funding groups, Utah Homeless Network, Homeless Council, for any reason. And then we reserve the right to reject any and all applications and to withdraw this offer at any time. So like we discussed, we're going to figure out the best folks for this funding. We're going to do it with an allocation committee, and then we're going to look at every single thing that's in the RFGA, the specific scoring criteria we have outlined. Because we are a state entity, anything you send to us, people can request to look at through a process called GRAMA. If you do not want that information to be shared, if you have some sort of secret business trait or skill that you don't want others to see, you can fill out the form that's in the RFGA packet or is hyperlinked here. And if it's approved, we won't share that information if someone requests it. We may award partial grants. So if you apply for a specific amount of money and due to whatever in the allocation process, we decide that we would like to award you a lesser amount, we will have the right to do that, but we will discuss it with you before doing so. And we may contact your local homeless council, the Utah Homeless Network, the Utah Homelessness Council, to discuss your applications, to get their input, to figure out what their priorities are. If you don't know who these groups are, you can find it on the End Utah Homelessness website. You can ask us. Hopefully, you know some folks in your community that are doing this work that you can connect with and get their input, make sure that you're doing things that align with your community's priorities. Last for this section is if you have questions, it makes our life a lot easier if you use this Google form. It allows us to organize things to make sure that we're responding to everybody and that the information that we're sharing out is the same to everyone. So you can see that Google Doc there. Or Google form there. We will ask that all those questions be into us by December 12th. This gives us the opportunity to make sure we've answered everything, to have everything out to everyone. And then from the 12th to the 19th, when the application's due, we'll kind of shut down questions, let you finish out your applications, get them submitted. And a plug for that form is if you have a question, check that first. A lot of times somebody else has already asked that, and you can go on there, find your question, get it real quick, and not have to wait for us to respond. But we do share all that. So you will have all the information you need, make sure you can submit the application on time and that it's a full application. Any questions on those pieces? Pretty standard stuff.
Will the PowerPoint slides be posted to the public notice website for all 3 HOME-ARP programs? Yep, they will.
Yeah, we'll try to get them up. Our website designer can take a little bit of time sometimes, but we'll get them up ASAP so you can review. Yeah, of course. Cool.
Perfect. So kind of how Russell mentioned, how Q&A questions will be submitted through that form. Another avenue for kind of finding responses to some of the questions that you have as you are completing the RFGA is this fact sheet, as I talked about a little bit earlier. And I will pull it up right now. So basically, this is just the fact sheet for the supportive services. There's going to be just a general overview, eligible services and costs. And then there will be oversight and management section. And that is it. So as you can see, there will be some helpful kind of content in there. It will just kind of bolster what we're talking about today and what is in the RFGA packet in and of itself. But this is just another helpful resource for you to utilize as you are completing that application. And then I'll turn it over to Amy to talk about the application process.
Thanks, Lily. Let's talk about how to actually put that application packet together and get it off to me, where you're going to find that information and some helpful things that are going to make it easier for you to go ahead and submit that. So this is what the landing page looks like. We're going to go into the different portions of the landing page to help you understand how to put that together. So first thing I want to look at is your application checklist. We're going to go over that really, really quickly to remind you of what you're going to need before you submit that application. Okay, so these are the things you're going to need to have put together, ready to go before you get in there and submit that application. This submission checklist is going to be found in that RFGA packet. And I'll show you where that is in a minute, but just a heads up, so you've got this stuff ready to go before you do that. So we're going to ask for because it is a federal grant, they're going to ask for a UEI number. If you've had a DUNS number in the past, those are being replaced by a UEI number, and you can get that on sam.gov. If you have any questions about that process, I would be happy to help you. One of us can help you with that. We've had some good experience with that and can help you with that. You're going to need your EIN, and then there is a reminder to get that letter of intent, and I'll show you where that link is. These are the things that are going to be part of your application. That grant application cover sheet and programming information. I'll go ahead and show you that in a minute. And that's going to be basically what you're going to complete and submit to us with all these different parts. That's going to be your application. You're going to complete that grant application narrative. That's going to be a fillable form that you're going to save somewhere on your computer. That's basically going to ask you those questions about, you know, what your project or program is, what you're telling us about, or your let me try that again. Basically, Lily's going to go over the questions that we're asking. If you've got a business license or articles of incorporation based on the type of business, if you're a nonprofit, if you're a private business, 501(c)(3) letter, and then there's going to be a budget narrative. And Russ is going to go over the budget narrative, but it isn't a certain template or a certain format. It's in Excel, and it's got certain formulas and different things that we want to keep in that format. So if you'll notice here, there is an email address next to it. We're going to ask that you don't attach that when you go to submit the application. You're going to go ahead and email that directly to us so we can keep that budget in that particular format. And then examples of other affording housing projects, verification of site control if applicable, award letters to verify other funding sources if applicable, and that local homeless council, I have the hardest time with that, local homeless council letter of support dated within the last 60 days. Okay, so this is what you're going to check off and make sure you have all of these things, if they're applicable, ready to go. Save them somewhere on your desktop, whatever, so that when you go into that grant application, they're ready to be attached. And I'll show you what that looks like. So make sure you're checking in your RFGA again, to make sure that you've got those ready to go. See what the other items I wanted to cover. This is what the RFGA looks like on the website, and you'll be able to find all of those items in that RFGA. The next thing I need to do is go to the website, correct?
Bottom left.
Yeah, all this engraves too. Okay. It's not there. No.
It's the second tab.
Yeah, to go into that, just a tab at the top. Or yeah, go back into the Chrome at the bottom.
You have to tell me this every
You're
time.
totally fine. And then just there.
Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry. You think I'd figure this out by the third time. Okay, so when you are on the website, let's walk through the different tabs and the information that's available. So here's the announcement tab that we looked at, that you're going to land on. That's going to tell you all the information. Just a reminder, here's that link to that letter of intent. We'll go back to that. Here are the eligibility requirements that Lily talked about. Just a reminder. Here's the application. We'll go into that in just a minute. Any addendums or changes that need to be made to the RFGA, any of the deadlines, anything there will show up here. So that's good to check from time to time. if anything, like I said, we're looking back on the RFGA or something else comes down based on the rules that need to be changed, it will be found there. As you can see, there's nothing there. And then Russell talked about those questions, that question and answer. That's where this is going to be found. So if you want to submit a question, you're going to click here. There is that quick form in Google. You're going to submit your question. Once those questions are submitted, like he said, you're going to go ahead and find them here. We don't have any yet, but he said those would be all updated by the 13th, correct? December 13th. And so those will be all ready to go. So you can check the fact sheet as well as those questions and answers that somebody may have asked to make sure you're ready to go before you complete that application. Okay, so just a reminder, that's where those are. So let's look at that actual application. Okay, so this is what your grant application cover sheet looks like. It's a fillable form, and it's going to ask you basically your organization's information. There's that UEI number, there's the federal tax ID number, and some other information specific to your organization. Everything with an asterisk is going to be required. Pretty simple, okay? What I recommend is you are going to fill this in last, okay? You're going to go down here and make sure you have all of these attachments ready to go, okay? That's why I recommend you check that application checklist. You've got all of those documents saved on your desktop or whatever, ready to go. Then you come into this grant application and have those ready to go. If you'll notice, this is when you click on it, it's a link to grab that attachment that you saved. Okay. So you're going to go in, click on here, you're going to grab that application narrative that you have completed and saved. It's a similar fillable form, but it's not going to ask you to submit it. It's going to have you save it somewhere. We're going to talk about the FFATA in a minute, but you're going to click and grab that FFATA. If you'll notice, you're not going to click and grab that budget. You're going to email it to us. So I recommend that once you've submitted this grant application, then right after you go ahead and email us that budget so that they've been set off at the same time. And then there's a link for that case management services plan. That's required. And then there is a link to that local homeless council letter of support dated within the last 60 days. I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but if for some reason you don't have a local homeless council letter of support, you're waiting for one that you didn't make the deadline, you're still going to need to have a document in here because it is required. So you're welcome to have an explanation on a Word document or a PDF or something saying, I'm waiting for a letter, or I reached out to my council and they said they didn't have the capacity to get me a letter, whatever the situation is, but that you did make a good faith effort. Make sure that you do have something in there to indicate that you made an effort to reach out to them or whatever that, but you've got to have a document to submit there because, like I said, it's a required field. And then down here, we've got those additional documents, if applicable. Those are not required fields. However, if you do not submit them at the time of application, based on the required documents that are needed for the actual grant agreement to go out to you, we may collect those later. Okay, so you may want to submit them at that time, or we may have to ask for them later. Okay. Again, there's only one, if you'll notice, one link or one place for an attachment. So if you do have multiple letters, you have multiple local homeless council letters, you need to combine them into one document and upload it. If you have any questions or issues with that, I would be happy to help you with that, to help you combine those or do whatever is needed. But you're only going to have one link spot to upload them. So you're going to go in, you're going to pick all the documents that are needed. You're going to click on the link, you're going to upload them, and then you're going to go up here and you're going to complete everything that's required. And then once everything that is filled in with the required asterisk, is going to give you a button that says submit. Okay, once you submit that, it's an Adobe program, and we're going to immediately get something time-stamped that at 3:47 p.m. on whatever date we received your application. That being said, you need to make sure right after, you go ahead and email us that budget, so we have that full application at that same time. Okay, so like I said, we'll get a copy of it. That generic email of OHS gets a submitted copy of it, and then we get an Adobe copy of it. So that's the process to make sure that we get your application.
Can I just say
Please.
quick thing?
Yes.
So for those additional required required documents, if you're ever wondering, like, I don't know if I need to
Thank you.
upload those will be associated with the narrative questions. So for example, like if it has, I can't remember a question off the top of my head that has one, but it's like, please attach, so-and-so, like a 501c3 letter, if you are a nonprofit entity. So it's associated with the question, so it's easy to kind of refer back to.
You said that in the last two, and I always forget to say it, so thank you for adding that, I really appreciate that. Let's look really quick at the grant application narrative, which Lily is gonna actually go through the questions really to help you. But basically, it's a fillable form, and you can see what's required. You're going to type in your information. You're gonna click on the box, and then like I said, it's not gonna give you a submit option. You're going to go ahead and save that, okay? Okay, and then we're going to look at this FAFSA certification. It's a big word, but it's basically a federal transparency. They are federal funds, and they want to find out if you have federal funds coming from somewhere else, basically. Okay, so it's asking you that if 80% or more of your annual gross revenue comes from US federal contracts, and it's very important that you see the and there, and you have $25 million or more in annual gross revenue from federal contracts. Okay, you only need to fill this out if you are basically private or nonprofit. If you're a state agency or a component unit means you are a public school, public university, excuse me. So you are one of the state technical schools. You're the University of Utah, you're Utah State University. You don't need to fill this out. If you have any questions, if you're a state agency or component unit, I will be happy to send you the list of those that are not required, okay? I want you to make sure you see that no is first. And the reason why no is first is because we get more no's than yeses. So make sure that if you don't meet either of those, you have to meet both, and click no, you scroll to the bottom, you'll fill it out and you'll attach it. If by chance you do meet yes, then you will need to complete this part about your executives and their compensation. But more than likely, it's going to be no, and that's why no is first, okay? So don't spend the time filling it out and telling us about your executive compensation and finding out that information if it is no. So make sure you read those both, and more than likely it's going to be no, okay? So that's what we're asking for. That is required because it is federal funding, okay? And then the last thing, again, is that budget, and I'm not going to pull it up because Russell's going to go through it, but make sure that you have completed that budget form. And then again, I can't stress enough, it needs to be emailed. I'm going to go back to the announcement tab really, really quickly here and remind you, letter of intent, okay? It is due by 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time on December 2nd. It's really easy. It's going to literally take you 2 minutes to complete it. So if you think you are going to complete the application and then you decide not to, but if you think you're going to complete the application, please make sure you go in and complete this. It literally takes 2 minutes. Your email, your organization name, you're going to hit submit at the bottom. We're going to get that. And then that gives us an idea of what we can prepare for and gives us an idea of how many grant applications that we're going to get in. And then we can be prepared for that. So please make sure you do that if you are interested in the grant. Last thing I just wanted to mention is we do have a link to. I need to hit the slideshow. Right there. I wanted to go over again. We talked about the application, the submission checklist, that. Oh, what I just wanted to, and I went past it, is that we do have a link to the webpage, and Russell mentioned to be able to find your local homeless council. So if you are not aware, there is a link on here that will take you to the local homeless council webpage, and then you can locate your local homeless council. And like Russell said, there are people in the community that can direct you there as well. So do we have any questions on how to actually complete your grant application? I guess not. So, okay, I will turn the time back over to Lily. Thanks.
All right, sweet. So I'm going to be talking about the narrative questions, obviously. And so I just wanted to highlight that there's a few different sections that will kind of be captured in the application. So the first one is going to be just general project information. And we'll have you kind of talk about or speak to like just what is your project type? There's going to be a select all that can kind of capture that. We also will have you upload a budget email that budget through that email address that Amy just mentioned. But there's just a yes, no response option for a question within the application, just to make sure that you did in fact prepare that. And you are planning and have that ready to go in terms of emailing it. We do have a case management plan question associated with this part of the application. We ask that you give us just a project summary and then specify which qualifying populations you will cover, and then talk about kind of your coordination efforts. So any partnerships or resources that you'll kind of make use of. The next section that will be captured in the application is application information. And this specifically speaks to your experience working with the qualifying populations your application is associated with, any similar projects you have completed, and then your experience with administering federal funding. I do want to highlight though, you will not be docked if you do not have experience or if you have a lack of experience. This is just kind of a helpful kind of basis for us to inform us as we read your application. So now we're going to take a quick break. Let's come back at 10:50. And I will put up a timer here so you can kind of keep track of your break. But make sure to stick around as Russell will be talking more about the capacity funding for nonprofits, and then we'll cover more of the supportive services program requirements.
Welcome back. We'll breeze through these last couple. All right, so we're gonna be talking about this optional nonprofit capacity funding. We referenced it at the beginning. This is some very specific funding for nonprofits and community housing development organizations. My favorite joke now is if you're not, or if you don't know what a CHODO is, you're probably not a CHODO. It's a very specific organization type. You do have to fill out paperwork, do some things for it. But if you're a nonprofit as well, you can apply for this funding. It's included at the end of the application as an optional section. And this would be in addition to any other funding you're getting. So it's capped at 50,000 per year, but it does provide you some support so you can continue to do these services, so you can provide the things you're saying you're going to provide. And it's a really cool HOME-ARP specific kind of pot of money that they allowed us to do. So some things you'll have to report on if you are awarded this optional nonprofit capacity building is we'll want to know who you hired. We'll want to know what they're doing. So what trainings and TA are they attending, performing? And then we want to know what activities are they supporting. So pretty simple stuff. You can see the application narrative question for it is asking you some pretty basic things about what are you going to be doing with this funding? How is it important? And then another question is what would happen if you don't get this funding? Are you still able to provide services? Do you have to provide them at a lower rate? Or are they going to be less quality? Things like that. That's the information we'll be considering when we're doing this review of who we need to and who can we award this nonprofit capacity funding to. So again, it's optional. If you don't qualify for it, can't apply for it. But if you do qualify and you don't want to apply for it, you don't have to. It's in addition to the award. You do have to be awarded your regular application. So if you're applying for supportive services, you do have to be awarded that to be eligible for this. You won't just get awarded the nonprofit capacity building on its own. If you have any questions on it, let us know. And again, it's a pretty interesting concept. And hopefully there's a lot of utility to it that you see and you go apply for it. Any questions on that? Okay. Excellent.
All right, so I'll talk about the scope of work really quick. It is associated with attachment B of the RFGA packet, so that's kind of your reference there. There's a few components that I wanted to highlight within the scope of work. The first one is responsibilities. So we ask that you complete the project as defined in the application and what was approved by the Utah Homeless Council and our office. We also ask that you determine eligibility for clients served and all activities performed as a result of funding under HOME-ARP supportive services, and then as well as other responsibilities as outlined in the RFGA packet. The next section I wanted to highlight is reporting. So we have a couple different reporting requirements or timelines that we'd like you to follow. And based off of whether or not you're awarded, if you are awarded, you'll get a program specialist that will kind of be your go-to contact. And those people will be who you submit this documentation to via email. And the schedule that we have outlined for reporting is based off of quarters. So first, second, third, and fourth with the associated dates listed here. And then we also have an annual report. And this is the full year's data, and it will be pulled at the same time as the fourth quarter and is due July 15th. But in addition to the kind of aggregate of all of the quarters data, a narrative report will be required on the completion of the grant and kind of at the end of each fiscal year. I do want to highlight that you must report on the content that we covered on slide 14 and 34 and any of the additional reporting requirements as described in the RFGA packet. So Russell will talk more about the budget specifically, but he'll talk about it on the next slide. But I do want to just talk about a few things here, just as a general rule of thumb. So we do ask that all grantees abide by the invoicing and reimbursement requirements that are defined in the scope of work. Again, just refer to that attachment B or feel free to reach out to us via the Q&A form. And we'd be happy to support you with any questions. Within this, we ask that you adhere to the approved budget that you set forth in that Appendix D and that you emailed that email address. And then also the claims that for reimbursement of expenditures have to be submitted online through web grants, which is our grant management portal, which will help you get set up in upon being awarded. And then any changes to the budget must be approved by our office prior to the expenditure date. And then lastly, these two bullets are so up to 95% of awarded funds can or may be initially provided as negotiated with our office upon the receipt of proper documentation. And then the remaining 5% or less of awarded funds will be provided upon the submission of complete and final expenditure documentation. So this can include payroll reports, invoices, and any other documentation that is applicable. All right, Russell.
Sweet.
Russell, before we go to the budget, we had a question in the chat. The question is, to clarify, the nonprofit capacity funding is in addition to the HOME-ARP grant?
Great question. So yeah, this will be, so let's say you apply for, we have 900,000, you apply for 100,000 of that, you get awarded that. Fantastic. We have these two additional buckets that we highlighted at the beginning. That is set aside for this nonprofit and operating capacity building. So that would be on top of it. So there's no specific amount that you'll apply for that. Like I said, it's capped at 50,000 a year or a percentage of your agency's budget. So we'll negotiate that out. But you do need to be awarded that first pot of funding to get the second. Hopefully that makes sense. Does that answer your question, whoever asked it?
They just responded and said thank you, so I think you're good.
Yeah, broken. Okay, well, let me jump down to the budget section here. And this is the traditional budget that we've used in our office. So if you're familiar with any other grants that we administer, then you should be familiar with this budget. It's pretty simple, but it does have some quirks to it. So you'll see at the beginning here, we're going to ask your organization and project name. I'm aware we already asked you that, but it does make our life a lot easier if we put it on this form as well. So thank you for doing that for us. Then it's going to get into this concept of admin. So your agency, if you've done any contracting with federal, with state, you should have some mechanism that you allocate your admin costs. One mechanism is indirect costs. That's through a NICRA that Amy will discuss a little bit further later, but it could also be through what's called de minimis for federal grants, or, I mean, those are two of the basic ways for doing it in an indirect format. You have to do it the same for all your contracts. So look at another contract you have with us or that you have with someone else to see what your mechanism is if you don't know it. The second way you can do it is through direct admin. And you can see the breakdown here. This is a little bit more difficult because it's not a set percentage. It's going to be based on your actual cost to administer the funding. That's about all I know for admin costs. If you have specific questions, talk to your accountant. You can call us. We'll get you in charge of, or get you in touch with fiscal. But please pay close attention to that. Know what you're going to need it for. And then this is included as part of your application. So if you're asking for 120,000, your admin cost should be inclusive of that 120,000. It's not like you'll get 120 and then admin costs on top of it. So just keep that in mind. Next is, this is your actual program costs. So this is what it's going to take for your program staff, for your different activities that you're hoping to do. This is what it is to administer the program. So please be as detailed as you can in those description, the blue in the middle. We need to know exactly how you got to that number. And we need to be able to understand, is this a reasonable cost? Is there some nuance to it that this is why it's more expensive to do it one way or another? And you can see, so instance for the salaries, an example of what we'd hope to see would be one FTE at approximately $25 an hour would equal X number of hours per year. And that's why we got to the salary cost. That's the level of detail we need. So if you have any questions on it, if you need help providing that, happy to do so. But it is important that we understand how you came up with the amount for each budget line, that you're not just throwing out a random round number that sounds about what it costs. We want to know you put some thought and we know exactly what your program costs to administer. Questions on that? All right.
sweet, we're almost done. I just wanted to kind of quickly go over the scoring rubric. This would be really a helpful tool for you to utilize as you are creating your narrative responses to those questions. So as Russell kind of articulated, the scoring, the application, the funding for both the supportive services, and then if you are awarded any of that nonprofit capacity funding, are completely separate. So there are 70 points available in the supportive service application and 25 points available in the nonprofit capacity funding. But none of those none of those points carry over, and they don't impact one another. And then if you are unable to receive a letter of support from your LHC, you still can receive partial points. So as Amy highlighted, you have to still submit a letter of justification as to why you weren't able to receive this letter of support. So you can still upload, as it is a required upload. And then Amy will talk about terms and conditions.
Hopefully I will be able to go through this quickly and I will not run anybody off. So as part of your grant agreement, if you're given the award, we will send you this package. And in the package are DWS, Department of Workforce Services grant terms and conditions. It is an 11-page document. I'm not going to go over 11 pages. I mean, I am, but I'm going to hit on some important things. That being said, you are still responsible for all of the information that is contained in the 11 pages. And you are responsible to meet, again, those grant terms and conditions. One thing I want to draw your attention to is conflict of interest. Basically, we want to make sure you're aware of what we consider a conflict of interest. And if you think you're going to have one ahead of time, please let us know if one comes up so we can help you remedy that conflict of interest. What is a conflict of interest? Basically, we want to make sure that during that grant period that none of your owners, directors, officers, or employees are also employees of DWS or the state of Utah. And the same thing is that you will not hire or subcontract with any person having that such conflict of interest. Okay. Again, if something happens, you will make sure that you notify us immediately of that conflict of interest, and we can work together to make sure that we are able to rectify that conflict of interest. Also, that none of your owners, directors, officers, or employees working under the agreement are relatives and employee of DWS. What is a relative? It's a lot of things. It's a spouse, a stepchild, and uncle, niece. It's pretty broad and it encompasses a lot of things that's considered a relative. Make sure you take a look at those. And then also that you as the grantee will not use grant funds to make any payments to an organization which has some things in common with you as the grantee. The owners or partners who are directly or indirectly own 10% or more of the voting interest in the organization, directors, officers, or others with authority to establish policies or make decisions for the organization. So kind of, don't be using grant funds to line somebody else's pocket, basically. Okay, so make sure that you're aware of those things that constitute a conflict of interest. Indemnity means that you are responsible for any liability during that agreement period, and that you are not holding DWS not liable or harmless to whatever happens. Bottom line is you will not indemnify DWS, and you are responsible, including anything also that a subcontractor does during that grant period. If you do need to make any changes to your grant agreement, that has to be through an amendment process. What does that mean? That means it's written and that both parties, DWS and you, have to sign off, and it has to be both agreed on. Okay, and that can mean a change of scope of work. That can mean we're extending the contract, things like that. And then automatic renewals will not apply to this agreement unless we talk about that. And I'll talk about, we don't have any renewals on this one. We want to make sure that you're aware that you cannot impose any fees upon any clients that you will be servicing with these funds, including any electronic payment fees. Okay. No human subject research. I always think this one's interesting. I think about like a hamster in a lab. That's not what we're looking at, but just make sure that no DWS employees or individuals receiving services through your grant are part of this. Any program reporting and evaluation that we're asking for, which we're going to be, is not considered any kind of human subject research. Just a reminder, Lily and Russell have talked a lot about responsibilities for the grant, about reporting and different things. And just a reminder that you are going to be responsible for all of the things outlined in that scope of work. Lily talked about those reporting requirements, those dates, those things. And you want to make sure that you are responsible. If you are going to be looking at maybe a subcontractor or someone else to do that, that has to be subgrantee, excuse me, that has to be in writing and that has to be approved with us. So if that's going to be something that you're looking at, make sure that you don't do that without previous approval through DWS and your program specialist. Okay. And that and then a reminder that anything that you do subgrant out, you're the one responsible. So even if you have a subgrantee, you're the one that is ultimately responsible for whatever is you're asked to do. So let them know that. Okay. Monitoring. You're obviously going to be monitored. Why do we monitor? It's not a punitive thing. We want to make sure that DWS and you and those you're serving are successful. Monitoring can be a scary thing. It's not. You're going to have a program specialist to help meet the things that we're asking. And monitoring can look like reports that we're asking you to submit. We might look at your finances. We might show up on site, but that's going to be arranged and it's going to be outlined in that scope of work. We're not going to show up in the middle of the night. We're not going to ask you to get out of your jammies to show us something. So we're going to make sure that that monitoring is all arranged with you. And again, it's to help you be successful. That being said, there is agreement termination. Nobody likes to hear the word termination, but there are some reasons that we may terminate your contract. Termination for cause means maybe you weren't able to meet meet compliance. Okay. That being said, we'll give you notice. We'll make sure that if there's something that you're not meeting, we'll give you written notice and time to remedy that, and then make sure we help you that. Immediate termination may happen if there's fraud, if some of the clients that you're serving are in danger, something like that, and there maybe you need to immediately terminate. No cost termination. Maybe you came up with other funding. There's a lot of reasons. We just ask for 30 days written prior notice. And then sometimes, legislator pulls the fund back. There may not be enough funds, something like that. We'll let you know in writing. And we will make sure that up until that date that funding is available, we'll make sure we get those reimbursements paid. We're not going to leave you hanging with reimbursements. Suspension of work. We're not going to terminate, but there may be a reason you're out of compliance or something, and we're asking you to suspend the work that you're doing under the grant until those things are remedied. Again, a renewal of any agreement is solely just is under the sole discretion of DWS. This is a 2-year competitive grant, and there is not a renewal on this one. And then we just ask that you, as a nonprofit or as whatever the organization or the private business, make sure you are following general, state, and federal laws. What does that mean? Fair Labor Standards Act. Make sure you have your workers' compensation. Make sure if you've got employees, you've got your unemployment insurance taxes paid. Those types of things to make sure that all of those things are met, including equal opportunity. Make sure the posters are in your business. If you have any questions about those things, we are happy to help you make sure that you are meeting those types of laws, but we're asking that you are following those. Okay, you do have to do some work on a state of Utah premises, more than likely not in this case, but if you do, make sure that any of the personnel are just following the same rules that any state of Utah personnel have to follow, be in the right place, follow the rules, make sure you're following that drug-free workplace standard. Okay, you are required, if you are given the grant, during the grant agreement period, if you do have any job openings, that they are posted with the Department of Workforce Services on jobs.utah.gov. It's an easy process. We can help you with that. We do have an additional code of conduct sheet as well as a background policy requirement that we're going to look at. Code of conduct has to do with serving clients that are minors or that's what I'm looking for. Thank you, vulnerable populations. And so if that's going to be the case, we'll have you look at that, and then that needs to be signed by your employees, volunteers, anybody working with that population, and then kept on file so that if we come out for monitoring, we are able to look at that. Same with the background check information. Okay. You need to make sure you also establish a grievance procedure. So anybody that you are serving with these grant funds, if they have a problem with the eligibility process or any of the services that you're providing, there is an established way for them to file a grievance and a way for it to be forwarded to the Department of Workforce Services. Make sure you are protecting client records. This is confidential information. You are doing your due diligence to make sure that is protected. And you are liable for that information as well as any kind of breach or leak of information. And if that does happen, you are responsible to make sure DWS is made aware of any kind of leak of information. Required insurance. I promise we're almost done. Required insurance. You are required to maintain uninterrupted coverage during that grant period of this general liability insurance. What are the requirements for this insurance? Let me rephrase, let me just add, for non-government agencies, okay? If you're a government agency, this does not require, this is not, remember, this is not applicable to you. Thank you. I'm having a brain problem. This is not applicable to you. So if you're not government, this applies to you. So this is the coverage you need to maintain during the time of the grant. You have 30 days after that grant agreement is sent to you and executed to make sure you get us this updated insurance certificate. Again, you need to have commercial general liability from an insurance company authorized to do business in the state of Utah. You need to have $1 million per person per occurrence and $3 million aggregate per occurrence. Okay. Any non-governmental agency must add state of Utah DWS as an additional insured with notice of cancellation. If you are going to use any kind of automobiles during the grant period, you need to make sure you have commercial automobile liability insurance, commercial automobile liability. That's a big word. Same with $1 million per occurrence. Okay. If you're going to have any social workers, dentists, anything like that, mental health therapists, you need the appropriate professional liability insurance with that $1 million per occurrence and $3 million aggregate. And then we want to make sure you have your workers' compensation insurance for all employees or subcontractor employees in place with that full liability insurance. Okay. And then if there's any other applicable insurance for the type of, the type of business or the type of company or organization you are, we want to make sure you have that in place. Financial reporting, we're going to ask you to report some things to us. Obviously, you're going to be submitting a reimbursement, but we want to make sure you're just following all other state and applicable federal financial reporting laws. Billings and payments, they talked about, Lillian and Russ talked about how you're going to submit those reimbursements through web grants. We just want to remind you that we do have some year-end things, and we want to make sure that you are submitting stuff to us for services for the month of June no later than July 15th. That's our year-end closeout. So we just want to make sure you get those to us so we can get you paid. There may be some reasons we do some payment withholding. I think that was covered, but some of the reasons we may be is you may have submitted something that was on your budget or that wasn't approved. So just make sure that you get that stuff approved so we don't run into any kind of payment withholding for something that wasn't approved. Okay, so we want to make sure we get that done. And then Russell showed you the budget, and we talked about this administrative expenditures. We do allow for those. You just need to make sure that you have let us know if you're going to do that in minimis or that NICRA. And if you're going to do the NICRA, you need to have that NICRA negotiated indirect cost rate letter, that approved letter with the federal with your agency, along with that information on the base rate, how to distribute those costs. If you have other grants with us, we may have that letter already, so we can check on that for you. Okay. And then any changes in your budget need to be pre-approved. So make sure, again, those are in writing so that we don't have any of these payment withholding problems. And then there are some rules about switching between, program 1, program 2, and program 3. Those are outlined very clearly on the budget of which expenses you can move in between, as well as, which expenses go under what category. Okay, I was very quick. Those are the important things to look out for. But like I said, again, you are going to be responsible for 11 pages of terms and conditions. So thank you for your patience, and we look forward to your applications.
All right, before we wrap up here, I just want to open it up for any questions, comments, or concerns that anyone has any burning desire to address. So we'll give everyone a few minutes or a few seconds to think of anything. All right, perfect. Well, then we did our job well. And as always, feel free to reach us through that Q&A form. We will always be monitoring that to answering any questions. And then as just a parting word, we really just appreciate you all taking the time out of your Friday to join us, or if you're joining virtually at a different date and time, because this will be recorded. We do appreciate you coming. We have our program contact information here with Russell Goodman, and then we have Chloe Norvell and Amy Lowe, who you just heard from as our contract analyst. So if you have any questions for them, that's their contact information. And without further ado, we will leave you to have a great rest of your Friday.